I had just retired after 40 years of working as an engineer. My dream was simple: to find peace. So I bought a small wooden cottage deep in the forest, miles away from the noise of the city. Every morning I woke up to birds singing instead of car horns, brewed coffee on the porch, and watched deer walk past my window. Life finally felt quiet, calm, and mine. Then one evening, my phone rang. It was my son-in-law, Eric. He didn't even say hello properly. "Listen," he said, "my parents are moving in with you. They need a place to stay for a while. You've got room, right? If you don't like it, you can always come back to the city." I froze. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. He was actually ordering me to let his parents live in my home, my forest home that I bought with my retirement money. I wanted to say no, to shout even, but something inside me told me to stay quiet. So I said, "All right, Eric, if that's what you think is best." He sounded pleased. "Good. They'll be there next weekend." After hanging up, I sat on the porch, staring at the trees. I wasn't angry. I was disappointed. My own daughter and her husband thought they could push me around like I was some old fool. But they didn't know me as well as they thought. Over the next few days, I came up with a plan, a quiet one. When Eric's parents arrived, they were going to find a surprise waiting for them, one they'd never forget.
That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing Eric's words echo in my head. "If you don't like it, come back to the city." The city, the place I had spent my entire life in, the place I left behind because I wanted peace, not people. But apparently, even miles away in the forest, people still found a way to invade peace. I stared at the ceiling for hours, thinking about what to do. I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my daughter's husband, dictate how I lived my retirement. Still, I didn't want to start a war with family. So I decided to be clever instead of angry. The next morning I started preparing. First, I cleaned up the cottage. Well, not to make it cozy for guests, but to make sure everything was in the right place for what I had in mind. I checked the small generator out back, the water supply, even the gas line. Living in the woods teaches you to be self-reliant, and I knew this place better than anyone. Every creak in the floorboards, every hidden trail behind the trees, I built half of it myself. Then I went into town. The shopkeeper, Bill, greeted me with his usual smile. "You getting ready for winter already?" he asked, noticing the amount of supplies I was buying. I just smiled and said, "Something like that." I picked up a few extra things: motion sensors, some wildlife cameras, and a few heavy-duty padlocks. When I got home, I spent the afternoon installing them. Not because I needed security, but because I wanted to keep an eye on how my guests behaved when they arrived. 3 days later, I got a call from my daughter, Laura. "Dad, please don't be upset," she said in a soft voice. "Eric's parents just need a place for a few weeks. They sold their condo and their new house isn't ready yet." I sighed. "Laura, honey, I'm not upset. I'll be ready for them." She sounded relieved. "Thank you, Dad. You're the best." But she didn't know what I meant by ready. The night before their arrival, I sat outside with a cup of tea under the moonlight. The forest was silent, except for the chirping of crickets and the crackle of my small campfire. I looked around my little paradise. The garden I planted, the old rocking chair, the path I made with my own hands, and I whispered to myself, "No one takes this away from me." When the morning came, I woke early. I cooked breakfast, packed my things quietly, and wrote a short note on the kitchen table. Then I left. Not far, though. I had set up a small tent deep in the woods, about half a mile from the cottage. I could still see the driveway through the trees. I wanted to watch their arrival. Around noon, a shiny SUV pulled up. Out came Eric's parents. his father in a fancy sweater, his mother holding her phone up like she was filming a travel vlog. They looked around, unimpressed. "This is it?" she said. "It's so small." Eric wasn't with them, of course. He had sent them like a delivery. They struggled with their bags and went inside. From where I was, I could see everything on my small monitor connected to the cameras. At first they were confused, then annoyed. The water pressure was low, the lights flickered a bit, and the generator made noise. They complained about everything. "How can anyone live like this?" I heard his mother say. I smiled quietly, but that was just the beginning. Because in the next few hours, they were going to realize that this house wasn't just any cottage. It had a few surprises built into it. Not dangerous, not harmful, just enough to make someone think twice before trying to take over another person's peace. The motion sensors were triggered every time they moved. Random lights flickered on and off in different rooms. The old pipes made strange noises at night, like whispers in the walls. I knew exactly how the place sounded. It was the forest breathing, but to someone new, it could be unsettling. Around sunset, I saw the mother clutch her husband's arm, whispering that she thought the place was haunted. I chuckled quietly to myself in the dark. I wasn't cruel. I just wanted them to understand one thing. Peace is earned, not taken. And if they were going to live in my house, they'd better respect that. But I had one final move planned, something that would make sure they never tried anything like this again. The surprise wasn't over yet. It was only beginning.
The sun dipped behind the tall pine trees, and the forest turned a deep shade of orange and gold. From my small camp hidden between the trees, I could see faint light glowing from the windows of my cottage. Eric's parents were inside, still complaining, still restless. The forest was alive that evening. The wind rustled through the leaves, and the old wooden cabin creaked like it was breathing. I knew that sound scared people who weren't used to nature. I didn't plan to scare them at first, but as I watched them treat my home like a hotel they didn't pay for, I decided a little lesson wouldn't hurt. I sipped my coffee and waited. I had set everything perfectly. Around 9 p.m., the generator would shut off for 30 minutes, and the backup light system, an old one I never repaired, would flicker randomly, just enough to make them nervous. Right on time, the lights inside began to blink. I saw Eric's mother stand up suddenly, holding her phone flashlight. "Why is this happening?" she shouted. Her husband tried to calm her, but even he looked uneasy. "Maybe it's just the power," he said. "It's an old place." But then the pipes began their symphony, low, hollow knocks echoing from the bathroom walls. Those pipes always made noise when the temperature dropped, but to outsiders, it sounded almost intentional. On my monitor, I saw them look around, confused, whispering. Then I activated the motion sensor near the back door. The sound of footsteps, recorded earlier, played faintly through the speaker I'd hidden under the porch. From inside, it sounded like someone walking outside in the dark. Eric's father froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. His wife clutched his arm. "Someone's outside," she said, trembling. I almost laughed. The woods can play tricks on your mind if you don't respect them. I wanted them to feel that, not to hurt them, just to remind them that peace and privacy aren't things to invade. An hour passed. The house was dim now, lit only by the fireplace they'd managed to start. I watched them sit close, whispering, jumping at every crackling noise. Then, slowly, I decided to send them a message. I had left a small envelope on the kitchen table earlier that day, under a note that said, "Welcome home." I watched through the camera as Eric's mother noticed it. She picked it up, curious, and opened it. Inside was a simple note in my handwriting. "This house doesn't like uninvited guests." Her face went pale. She looked around the empty room as if expecting me to appear. I could almost feel her fear through the screen. They packed their things within minutes, but I wasn't done watching.
I saw them rush outside, trying to start the car, but the forest road is tricky at night, and their tires got stuck in the mud. I stepped out of my tent quietly, flashlight off, blending into the trees. The sound of their engines struggling broke the forest's silence. I stayed hidden, watching them argue. "We should call Eric," she cried. "No signal out here," he shouted. I decided it was time. I turned on my flashlight and walked slowly toward them, the beam cutting through the darkness. "Everything all right?" I asked, pretending to be surprised. They froze, eyes wide, like they'd just seen a ghost. "Oh, it's you," the man stammered. "The power went out and we thought someone was outside." I smiled kindly, the way an old man might. Yes, the forest does that sometimes. Makes you think you're not alone." They nodded nervously. "You two look tired," I continued. "Why don't you rest? I'll get the generator running again." They thanked me shakily and went back inside. As soon as they disappeared, I shut off the flashlight and whispered under my breath, "Now let's see how long you last." I spent the rest of the night near the edge of the property, watching. The cameras caught every flicker, every shiver, every whisper. Around 2 a.m., I saw the front door open again. They were leaving. Car packed, headlights cutting through the mist. They didn't even make it one full night. I didn't stop them. I just stood among the trees, invisible, watching as they drove off down the narrow road back to the city. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Laura. "Dad, what happened?" she asked, panic in her voice. "Eric's parents said the house was haunted." I took a long breath, looked out over the quiet forest, and said calmly, "Haunted? No, sweetheart. It's just not meant for people who don't respect peace." There was silence. Then she sighed softly. "Dad, they're not coming back." I smiled. I know. When the call ended, I sat back on the porch again, coffee in hand, feeling the forest breathe around me. My home was mine again. But something told me this wasn't over. Eric wasn't the kind of man to let things go so easily. And when he decided to confront me about what really happened that night, I was ready for him too. 2 days passed after Eric's parents fled the cottage, and the forest returned to its calm rhythm again. The wind carried the scent of pine, the river nearby murmured softly, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely at peace. But I knew that peace wouldn't last. When I looked at my phone and saw Eric's name flashing on the screen, I already knew what was coming. I let it ring twice before answering. "Dad," he said, voice tight with anger, "what the hell did you do? My parents barely made it through the night. They said your place is haunted." I took a slow sip of coffee. "Haunted?" I said softly. "That's strange. I've lived here for months and never saw a single ghost." There was silence on the other end. Then he snapped, "Don't play games with me. They were terrified. You must have done something." I leaned back in my chair, looking out through the trees. "Eric," I said calmly, "I did nothing except enjoy my peace. Maybe the forest didn't like strangers." He didn't find it funny. "I'm coming there," he said coldly. "We're going to talk about this face to face." I smiled. "All right, son. I'll have coffee ready." The call ended. The forest fell silent again, but I could feel the tension rising like a storm on the horizon. I spent the next day quietly preparing. Not traps this time, not tricks, but boundaries. The kind that aren't made of wood or metal, but of patience and wisdom. When Eric's black truck appeared on the narrow road the next afternoon, I was sitting on the porch with a cup of tea and an open book. He stepped out, sunglasses on, anger written all over his face. "Nice place," he said sarcastically, looking around. "Too bad you scared my parents half to death." "Coffee?" I offered, ignoring his tone. "No thanks," he muttered, marching up the porch. "I came here for answers." I closed my book slowly. "Ask, then." "Why? Why would you do that to them? They just needed a place for a few weeks. You could have said no." I looked him straight in the eyes. "You never asked me. You told me. There's a difference." He frowned, speechless for a moment. I continued. "You thought you could decide how I live because I'm old. You thought this house, this life was something you could take. So I reminded your family what happens when you take what isn't yours. You think scaring old people is some kind of lesson?" he shouted. The forest echoed his voice back at him like it was mocking him. I didn't shout back. I just stood up slowly, walked to the edge of the porch, and pointed toward the dense trees. "Do you hear that?" He paused, listening. The forest hummed softly, birds, wind, the whisper of leaves. "That's what I came here for. Not traffic, not arguments, just that." He looked around, unsure how to respond. I could see a bit of guilt behind his anger, though he was trying hard to hide it. "You could have just said no," he muttered. "You wouldn't have listened," I said simply. "You never do." He turned away, pacing. "My wife thinks you've lost your mind." I smiled faintly. "Maybe I found it." For a moment, we both stood silent, the only sound being the creaking of the wooden steps under his boots. Then he sighed, rubbing his forehead. "All right, I'll tell them not to come back. But you scared them pretty bad. You should apologize." I tilted my head. "If I do that, they'll think they were right. They weren't." He shook his head, muttering something under his breath. Then he walked toward his truck. I thought he was leaving, but instead he stopped halfway and turned back. "You know, my parents really think this place is haunted. They said they heard voices, whispering. Was that your idea too?" I stared at him quietly for a long second, then smiled. "The forest talks to those who don't respect it. Maybe it just wanted to say hello." He gave me a strange look, half skeptical, half nervous. "Right. Well, take care of yourself, old man," he said finally, opening the truck door. "And don't call me again," I replied. He drove off without another word, his tires crunching over the gravel road until the sound faded into the trees. I watched until he disappeared completely. Then I walked back inside. Everything was still, peaceful again. But as I sat down, I heard something new, soft, faint, like a whisper from the far end of the hall. I froze. I knew every sound this house made, but this one was different, almost like a voice, low and distant, saying my name. I smiled slowly, half amused, half curious. Maybe Eric wasn't entirely wrong. Maybe the forest really did talk back sometimes. But I didn't feel afraid. I just whispered back, "Welcome home." That night, after Eric drove away, I sat by the fire with a blanket over my shoulders. The forest outside was calm again, the kind of silence that isn't empty but alive, filled with breathing trees, restless owls, and the hum of distant insects. I told myself the whisper I heard earlier was just my imagination, maybe the wind passing through the cracks of the old cabin. But as the flames flickered lower, I heard it again, soft, barely there. "Henry." My name. I froze. I knew that voice. It wasn't Eric. It wasn't anyone alive. I slowly stood up, heart pounding. The sound seemed to come from the far end of the hallway, near the room I never used, the one that still had my late wife's old rocking chair. I hadn't been in that room for months. I walked quietly, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The closer I got, the clearer the whisper became. Not words, just a rhythm, a soft hum that somehow felt familiar. When I opened the door, the chair was rocking slowly by itself, creaking in time with the wind outside. I didn't move. I just stood there, watching. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I whispered, "Mary?" The chair stopped. The air was heavy,
but not frightening, almost comforting. I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. Her photographs were still there, her knitting basket untouched, the faint scent of lavender she used to love still lingering in the air. I realized then that maybe the forest wasn't haunting me. Maybe it was keeping me company. Maybe it knew I needed it. I sat there for hours, remembering her laughter, her stories about how she wanted to live in a quiet place surrounded by trees. This cottage had been our dream. I just got to it a few years too late. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows, and for the first time I didn't feel the ache of loneliness as much. The whisper was gone, but the peace stayed. I brewed coffee and stepped outside to the porch. Birds darted through the air, and the forest shimmered with light. It felt like Mary was still here, in every rustle of the leaves, in every soft breeze that brushed against my face. Around noon, a truck appeared again on the road. For a second, I thought it was Eric, but it wasn't. It was Laura, my daughter. She stepped out, looking worried and tired. "Dad," she said softly, "can we talk?" I nodded and handed her a cup of coffee. She sat beside me, looking around. "It's beautiful here," she said. "I didn't realize how peaceful it is." "That's why I came," I said quietly. She hesitated. "Eric told me what happened. I wanted to see for myself." I nodded slowly. "And what do you think?" She sighed. "I think he was wrong to send his parents here without asking you, and I think maybe we've all forgotten what peace looks like." I smiled faintly. "You're your mother's daughter, after all." She looked down, then asked softly, "Do you ever miss her?" I stared out at the trees. "Every day. But sometimes when the wind moves through the woods, it feels like she's still talking to me." She smiled sadly. "Mom used to say that trees remember everything." She did. And maybe that's why I came here, to remember. We sat in silence for a while. Then she said, "Eric wants to come back. He feels guilty. He said he wants to apologize." I didn't answer immediately. I just listened to the forest. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker tapped at a tree. "He can come," I said finally. "But this time, he'll listen." She nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind my words. Before she left, she hugged me tightly, the kind of hug that says what words can't. "Take care of yourself, Dad," she whispered. "Always do," I said. When her truck disappeared down the road, I went back inside. The house was quiet again. But that night, just before I fell asleep, I heard the whisper once more, not from fear, not from loneliness, but from love. It was gentle, warm, almost like a lullaby. "You did the right thing," it said. I smiled in the dark. "I know," I whispered back. "Thank you." Outside, the wind rose again, brushing against the cabin walls like an old friend. And somewhere between the sound of the forest and the creaking of the chair, I knew Mary was still watching, still making sure I never forgot what peace really meant. 3 weeks passed before I saw Eric's truck again. By then, autumn had started painting the forest in gold and fire. The air had grown crisp. Leaves fell like quiet memories over the cabin roof. I had almost started to believe that everything was settled, that maybe Eric had decided to leave me in peace. But when the distant hum of his engine reached my ears, I knew I was wrong. I was sitting on the porch with a book when the truck stopped by the old gate. Eric stepped out slowly this time. No sunglasses, no anger, just a tired man with something heavy on his shoulders. He stood there for a moment, looking around as if seeing the place for the first time. "You can come in," I said. My voice was calm. He walked up the path, crunching leaves beneath his boots.
It's quiet here, he said. Too quiet. That's the point, I replied. Coffee? He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, sure. We sat on the porch together, steam curling up from our mugs. Neither of us spoke for a while. The forest did all the talking. Rustling branches, chirping birds, the soft rush of wind through dry leaves. Finally, Eric said, I owe you an apology. I looked at him, surprised but silent. He went on, I was wrong. About the house, about sending my parents here. I didn't understand why you wanted to live like this. I thought you were running away from everything. Maybe I was, I said softly. But sometimes you need to run away to remember what you're running toward. He looked thoughtful. Laura told me what you said, that you never listen. Did she? I smiled faintly. She's right. You hear words, but you don't listen to silence. He frowned slightly. Silence? Yes, I said. Silence tells you everything you refuse to face. He nodded slowly, staring into the trees. You know, when my parents got back, they swore they heard voices here. My mom still has nightmares. I thought they were crazy. But now... He paused. Now, sitting here, I almost feel it too. Like something's watching. I didn't answer. I just watched the wind move through the forest. This place listens, I said finally. It knows who respects it and who doesn't. He gave me a strange look. You sound like one of those old mountain hermits. I chuckled. Maybe I've become one. We sat there again in silence. Then Eric said quietly, Laura and I, we've been having problems. She says I'm always too focused on control, that I don't slow down. I guess she's right. You're learning. That's good. He sighed. She wants to come stay here for a few days. Said she needs to breathe. You're welcome. But remember, this house doesn't belong to people. It belongs to peace. He nodded slowly, as if understanding. After lunch, we walked down to the river behind the cabin. The water sparkled under the pale sun. Eric picked up a stone and threw it across. You ever get lonely out here? I smiled. Not really. The forest talks enough. Still hearing things? He said with a grin, half joking. Sometimes, I said. But they don't scare me anymore. He looked curious. What do they say? I turned to him and said quietly, mostly that people forget how to listen to what isn't human. He didn't respond, but his expression softened, like something inside him understood, even if he couldn't explain it. When we got back to the cabin, he helped me stack wood for the fireplace. Then he said, I think I get it now. You're not hiding here. You're living. Exactly. And living doesn't always mean being surrounded by people. He nodded, then looked around one last time. You know, this place, it's peaceful, but it's heavy, like it remembers everything that happens here. It does. The forest has a memory. He gave a small, almost uneasy smile. Then I hope it remembers this day better than the last one. It will, because today you listened. When he drove away that evening, I watched his truck disappear through the trees again. But this time, it felt different. He had come as a storm before, angry, loud, demanding, and left like the wind, quiet and thoughtful. I thought, maybe, just maybe, the forest had whispered something to him too. That night, as the fire died down and I sat in my chair, I heard the familiar whisper again. Only this time, it wasn't just my name. It said something else, something that made me sit up straight. It said, he will come back.
I stared into the darkness. The voice was soft, sad, like a warning. "Who?" I whispered. The air didn't answer. The only sound was the wind pressing against the windows. I looked around the cabin. The photos, the shadows, the stillness. For the first time in weeks, a chill ran through me. Maybe the forest wasn't finished with its lessons yet. Maybe peace came with a price. I stood, walked to the porch, and looked out at the sea of trees swaying under the moonlight. I murmured, "If he's coming back, then so am I." The wind rustled the branches in reply, almost like it understood. It was 2 nights after Eric's visit when the forest began to change. At first it was subtle, branches that creaked at odd hours, a soft knocking at the back door when the wind was still. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks again, the way it used to when I first moved here. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The forest had started to speak again, and this time it didn't sound peaceful. On the 3rd night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my cabin. Slow, deliberate, crushing the fallen leaves one by one. I stayed still, listening. Then came a voice, low, rough, familiar. "Hello?" It was Eric. I went to the window and saw him standing at the edge of the porch, moonlight catching the side of his face. He looked pale, exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. "Eric?" I called. "What are you doing here?" He looked up, startled, then gave a weak smile. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. "Laura's gone." "Gone?" He nodded. He said she left 2 nights ago, said she couldn't stand the house anymore. The whispers kept her awake. Said she heard your name. My stomach tightened. "My name?" "Yeah," he said quietly. "She said it came from the woods, over and over. Daniel." I froze. No one had called me by my full name in years. "Eric," I said slowly, "when you were here last time, did you hear anything?" He hesitated. "Maybe. I thought it was the wind, but last night it followed me. Even after I left the cabin, I could still hear it. I came back because—" He stopped. His eyes darted toward the trees. "Because I think it wants something." I opened the door and stepped outside. The night was cold, the air thick like mist. The trees stood still, too still. "Come inside," I said. "We'll figure this out." We sat by the fire, its glow flickering over Eric's anxious face. He looked around nervously as if expecting the walls to speak. "You said she heard my name. Did she say anything else?" He nodded. "She said she saw someone, out there near the tree line. Looked like you, but older." My heart dropped. "Older?" I whispered. He nodded again. "She said the man was staring right at her, didn't move, just stood there. For a moment, the only sound was the fire crackling. Then I said, 'Eric, there's something I never told you.' He looked up. 'The reason I came here wasn't just for peace. It was because of what happened to my brother.' 'Your brother?' 'Yes,' I said. 'His name was Daniel, too. I was named after him. He died in these woods when I was 12. They said he got lost, but I heard him calling my name that night. I heard it for hours, until it stopped. When I moved here, I thought maybe I could make peace with that memory.
But sometimes I think the forest remembers him too. Eric's face went pale. You mean you think it's him? I don't know. But if Laura saw someone that looked like me, older, then maybe the forest isn't just echoing sounds. Maybe it's echoing souls. The fire suddenly hissed, and the lights flickered. A cold wind swept through the cracks of the cabin. Eric jumped up. Did you feel that? I nodded. It's starting again. We heard it then, a faint voice outside, soft, distant, like a child calling from far away. Daniel? Eric's eyes widened. That's it! That's what I heard. That's what Laura heard. The voice came again, closer this time. Daniel? I grabbed the lantern and walked toward the door. Eric tried to stop me, but I shook my head. I said, It's okay. It's been waiting too long. We stepped outside. The forest glowed silver under the moon. And there, near the tree line, stood a figure. He looked like me. Same face, same eyes, but older. Weathered. Hollow. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. Eric whispered, That's impossible. The figure raised a hand slowly, pointing toward the cabin. Then, in a voice that sounded like mine, it said, You left me. I froze. My throat felt dry. I didn't. I was a child. The figure tilted its head, expressionless. Remember. And then suddenly the forest began to scream. The trees bent, the ground trembled, and the air filled with whispers, hundreds of them, overlapping, crying, laughing, begging. Eric fell to his knees, covering his ears. I could barely stand, but I didn't move. I looked at the figure and said, What do you want? It stepped forward just enough for me to see its eyes, my eyes, filled with something ancient and endless. It said, Remember. And then it was gone. The forest fell silent. Eric gasped for breath. What the hell was that? I didn't answer. I just stared at the place where the figure had been. Not hell, I said softly. Memory. When we went back inside, the clock on the wall had stopped. The fire had gone out. Eric sat down, shaking. I think I understand now why you live here. I looked at him. Do you? He nodded. It's not about peace. It's about making peace. I smiled sadly. Exactly. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window until dawn, watching the forest breathe. Somewhere out there, something waited not to haunt, but to be remembered. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid.
Morning came gray and heavy. The forest was soaked in fog, like the world itself was holding its breath. I hadn't slept at all. Eric was still inside, his head resting on the table, exhausted from everything he'd seen. I stepped outside, lantern in hand, even though the sun was trying to break through the mist. Everything felt different. Quiet, but not calm, as if something was waiting for me at the edge of the woods. I walked until the ground beneath me turned soft with moss. The air smelled of wet pine and memory. That's when I heard it again. My name. Daniel.
Only this time it wasn't a whisper. It was clear, strong, filled with sorrow and love. I turned and saw him, my brother, standing among the trees, his figure made of light and shadow. His eyes were no longer hollow. They were kind. He said, "You didn't leave me." I felt tears burn my eyes. "I tried to find you. I was a kid. I didn't know where to go." He shook his head. "You came back," he said softly. "That's all that matters." Behind him, the forest shimmered, like every soul it had ever taken was breathing again, free at last. I took a step closer. "What do you want me to do?" He smiled faintly. "Remember us. Live without the weight." The wind picked up, carrying leaves in circles around us. I blinked, and he was gone. Only the trees remained, silent, witnesses to something ancient and forgiving. When I returned to the cabin, Eric was awake, staring at the fire that had somehow reignited itself. He said, "I saw her. Laura. She was outside for a moment, smiling." I nodded. "The forest lets go when it's time." He looked at me, eyes wide. "What are you going to do now?" I looked out the window, where light was finally breaking through the fog. I said, "Stay, not because I'm running from the world, but because I finally found peace in it." Eric stood up slowly, walked to the door, and looked back. "You think it's over?" I smiled. "The forest never ends. It just waits for the next person who needs to remember." He nodded and left without another word. I watched his truck disappear down the road, then turned back to the fire. It crackled gently, as if whispering its approval. I sat down in Mary's old rocking chair, and for a moment I thought I felt her hand on my shoulder. The wind sighed against the walls, and the voice came one last time, not from outside, but from within the house itself. "Rest now," it said. I closed my eyes, smiled, and whispered, "I will." Outside, the forest swayed softly. Finally, at peace. And deep within the woods, a single echo remained, a quiet reminder that love never really leaves. It just changes shape and waits among the trees.